My name is Rebecca Martinez, and I'm 26 years old. I'm standing in my childhood bedroom, holding two identical invitations that represent everything wrong with my family. One reads Rebecca's Special Celebration, and the other, Harmony's Dance Recital Final Performance. The shock of discovering my parents chose my golden child sister's dance recital over what they thought was just another one of my attention-seeking events is crushing me. The devastating irony hits like a sledgehammer. They just declined attending their own daughter's wedding. I stare at my wedding dress hanging in the closet, realizing this pattern of neglect has reached its ultimate breaking point. Before we dive into this story that will make your blood boil, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button if you've ever felt forgotten by your own family. And don't forget to subscribe because this tale of family betrayal is just getting started. Growing up in the Martinez household meant living in the permanent shadow of perfection, and that perfection had a name, Harmony. My younger sister, now 22, had been the family's shining star since she took her first ballet step at age 4. While other families might have 2 children, we functionally had one child who mattered, and one child who existed to make that child look even better. My parents, Robert and Linda Martinez, were wealthy real estate developers who built their entire identity around living vicariously through Harmony's success. Every conversation at dinner revolved around her latest achievement. Every family photo was positioned to showcase her trophies, and every family decision was filtered through the question of how it would impact Harmony's career. The pattern started early and never wavered. When I was 8 and won the school spelling bee, my parents missed the ceremony because Harmony had a dance rehearsal. When I graduated valedictorian from high school, the celebration dinner was cut short because Harmony needed to get to bed early for a competition the next morning. College was worse. I earned a full academic scholarship to Northwestern University for marketing, but my parents spent my graduation weekend at Harmony's audition for a summer intensive program. When I landed my dream job at Fletcher Marketing Group and got promoted to senior account manager within 2 years, my announcement at family dinner was interrupted by Harmony's news about receiving a scholarship to continue her training. The favoritism wasn't subtle. My parents' social media was a shrine to Harmony's accomplishments. Their living room displayed dozens of her performance photos and trophies, while my college diploma hung alone in the downstairs hallway. Friends of the family knew intricate details about Harmony's training schedule, her diet, her upcoming performances, but most couldn't tell you what I did for work. At family gatherings, I became invisible the moment Harmony walked into the room. Aunts and uncles would swarm her with questions about her career while I stood in corners, perfecting my fake smile. That's when David Thompson entered my life like a breath of fresh air. David was different from anyone I'd ever met. As a certified public accountant at Morrison Financial, he was methodical, kind, and possessed an innate sense of fairness that made him notice things others missed. The first time I brought him to a family dinner, he watched the dynamics with growing horror. After witnessing my parents ignore my story about landing a major client to focus exclusively on Harmony's upcoming recital, David pulled me aside later that evening. "Becca," he said gently, "what I just witnessed wasn't normal family dynamics. That was systematic emotional neglect." His validation of what I'd experienced my entire life was both heartbreaking and liberating. David had grown up in a family where achievements were celebrated equally, where love wasn't conditional on performance, where parents showed up for their children simply because they were their children. Watching him interact with his parents, seeing how his mother remembered details about his work projects and his father called just to check in, showed me what family could look like. When David proposed after 2 years of dating, kneeling in the park where we'd had our first date, I said yes not just because I loved him, but because I finally understood what it meant to be chosen unconditionally. But even our engagement couldn't escape my family's toxic dynamics. When I announced our engagement at Sunday family dinner, my mother's first response was concern about how a wedding might interfere with Harmony's performance schedule. My father immediately started calculating costs and suggesting we wait until after Harmony's big audition season. No congratulations, no excitement, no questions about my happiness. Just immediate strategizing around how to minimize disruption to the family's real priority. That night, David held me as I cried, and together, we made a decision that would change everything. We would plan an intimate wedding and extend one final invitation to my parents to show up for me. but we wouldn't tell them what the event actually was. If they couldn't prioritize their daughter without knowing exactly what they'd be missing, then they'd proven they didn't deserve to be there at all. The decision to plan a secret wedding wasn't made lightly. David and I spent weeks discussing whether we should give my family one last chance to prove they could put me first, even when they didn't know what was at stake. We ultimately decided that if my parents truly loved me, they would attend an event I described as important, regardless of what it was. If they couldn't do that, then we'd have our answer about where I stood in their priorities. The plan was both a test and a protection. We would know once and for all if my family was capable of change, and I would have the wedding of my dreams surrounded only by people who genuinely wanted to be there. David's family estate provided the perfect venue. The Thompson property featured a gorgeous garden with mature oak trees, stone pathways, and a gazebo that looked like something from a fairy tale. We planned for 15 guests: David's parents, his brother Marcus, who would officiate, 3 couples who were our closest friends, and hopefully my parents and Harmony. The intimate setting felt right for who we were as a couple. We didn't need a grand spectacle. We needed authenticity. We hired a local florist to create simple but elegant arrangements, arranged for a small string quartet, and planned a reception dinner at David's favorite restaurant downtown. My one ally in the family was my Aunt Carmen, my mother's younger sister who had always seen through the family's dynamics. Carmen had been the one to attend my high school graduation when my parents couldn't be bothered to reschedule around Harmony's rehearsal. She was the one who remembered my birthday every year and called to celebrate my work promotions. When I confided in Carmen about the wedding plan, she was initially hesitant. "Mija," she said, using the endearment shed called me since childhood. "Are you sure you want to put yourself through this? What if they don't come?" But when I explained that I needed to know for certain where I stood, she understood. Carmen promised to attend and to keep our secret, even from my mother. The invitations were crafted carefully. Instead of traditional wedding announcements, we sent elegant cards that read, "Rebecca Martinez requests the pleasure of your company at a special celebration in honor of a new chapter in her life." We included the date, time, and location, along with a note that formal attire was requested. The ambiguity was intentional. Anyone who truly cared about me would attend based solely on the fact that I'd called it important. We sent the invitations 3 weeks in advance, giving everyone plenty of time to make arrangements. David's family responded within days with enthusiastic confirmations. His mother called immediately, asking if she could help with any preparations and expressing how excited they were to celebrate with us. His father sent a text saying he'd already blocked off the weekend and was looking forward to whatever I had planned. Our friends responded similarly, with questions about what to wear and offers to help with setup. The contrast with my family's silence was deafening. Then, exactly 1 week after sending the invitations, Harmony sent a text that made my stomach drop. "Emergency," she wrote. "The Lincoln Center moved my final recital to the same date as your little party. I'm so sorry, but you know how important this performance is for my career. Mom and Dad will obviously need to be there. Maybe we can celebrate whatever you're planning some other time." The timing felt too convenient to be coincidental. Harmony had been performing at various venues for years, and schedule changes were typically announced months in advance, not days before the event. When I called my mother to discuss the conflict, her response was everything I'd expected and dreaded. "Rebecca," Linda said in that slightly irritated tone she reserved for my perceived inconveniences, "you're always having these little events. Harmony's recital is at Lincoln Center. This could be the performance that changes her entire career. Surely you understand that family sometimes means making sacrifices for the person with the most at stake." When I tried to explain that my event was genuinely important, that it wasn't just another casual gathering, she cut me off. "Sweetheart, if it were really that important, you would have told us what it was instead of being so mysterious. This feels like more attention-seeking behavior, and frankly, I'm disappointed." My father's response was even more crushing. When he got on the phone, Robert didn't even pretend to consider my feelings. "Rebecca, your sister has worked her entire life for opportunities like this. Your mother and I have invested everything into her career. We can't just abandon that for one of your parties. Maybe next time plan your celebrations when your sister isn't performing." The casual dismissal, the assumption that anything I did was automatically less important than anything Harmony did, The complete lack of curiosity about what I might be celebrating. It all confirmed what I'd known my entire life but had hoped might somehow be different this time. That evening, David found me crying in our apartment, holding the phone after my parents had definitively declined to attend. His fury was immediate and protective. "They didn't even ask what you're celebrating," he said, his voice tight with anger. "They didn't even pretend to care." "Becca, this is emotional abuse. This is a pattern of systematic neglect that has nothing to do with your worth and everything to do with their inability to love unconditionally." His validation helped, but it couldn't erase the pain of realizing that my parents would rather attend Harmony's performance than investigate what might be important enough for me to plan a formal event. The morning of our wedding dawned crisp and beautiful, with October sunlight filtering through the oak trees on the Thompson estate. I woke up in the guest house where I'd spent the night, surrounded by my closest friend Sophia, who had flown in from Seattle to be my maid of honor, and David's sister-in-law Emma, who had insisted on helping me get ready. The atmosphere should have been pure joy, but I couldn't shake the hollow ache in my chest where my parents' presence should have been. Every time my phone stayed silent, every moment that passed without a call or text from my family, drove home the reality that they had chosen Harmony over me yet again. I wore my grandmother's vintage lace dress, a stunning 1,960 seconds gown with delicate beadwork and a chapel train that my father's mother had worn to her own wedding in Mexico City. Abuela Rosa had given it to me years ago, saying it should be worn by a woman who understood the value of true love. The dress fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for me all these years. As Sophia fastened the dozens of tiny buttons up the back and Emma arranged my veil, I kept checking my phone, hoping against hope for a last-minute change of heart from my parents. David's family had transformed the garden into something magical. White roses and baby's breath adorned every surface. String lights were woven through the tree branches, and the gazebo was draped in flowing fabric that caught the morning breeze. David's mother, Patricia, had tears in her eyes when she saw me in my dress. "Rebecca," she said, taking my hands, "you look absolutely radiant. David is the luckiest man alive." Her genuine emotion and excitement for our day stood in stark contrast to my own family's absence. David's father, William, walked me down the aisle in place of Robert, and his steady presence and obvious pride in welcoming me into their family helped fill some of the void left by my father's choice. 20 minutes before the ceremony, Aunt Carmen arrived in a flurry of righteous anger that I'd never seen from her before. Carmen was typically the peacemaker in our family, the one who smoothed over conflicts and made excuses for others' behavior. But today, she was furious. "Mija," she said, pulling me aside from the other guests, "I need to tell you what happened. I couldn't let you go through this day without knowing the truth." Carmen had confronted my mother that morning, directly asking how Linda could miss her daughter's wedding. The response had been even worse than I'd imagined. "When I told your mother she was missing your wedding," Carmen continued, her voice shaking with emotion. She didn't seem surprised. She said, "If Rebecca wanted us there, she should have been honest instead of playing games. This manipulation is exactly why we can't trust her, Rebecca," she knew. Somehow, she figured it out, and she still chose not to come. The betrayal cut deeper than anything I'd experienced before. It was one thing for my parents to miss my wedding because they didn't know what it was. It was another entirely for them to knowingly choose my sister's recital over my wedding day. But Carmen wasn't finished. She revealed that my parents' resentment toward me ran deeper than I'd ever understood. "Your mother told me that you've never been special like Harmony," Carmen said, her voice breaking as she repeated Linda's words. "She said that some children are born to achieve great things, and others are born to support those who do. She said you've always been jealous of your sister's talents, and that your constant need for attention has been a burden on the family since childhood." The cruelty of reducing my entire existence to a supporting role in Harmony's story was breathtaking. I hadn't just been overlooked. I'd been actively resented for not being extraordinary enough to deserve my parents' love. Despite the devastating revelation, our ceremony was beautiful. David's brother Marcus, who had become ordained specifically to marry us, spoke about love that chooses daily to see the best in someone. David's vows brought tears to every guest's eyes as he promised to be the family I'd always deserved, to celebrate my achievements as enthusiastically as my struggles, and to ensure I never again felt invisible or unworthy of love. My own vows focused on gratitude for a love that didn't require performance, for a partner who saw my worth when I couldn't see it myself, and for the gift of learning what healthy love actually looked like. During our first dance to At Last by Etta James, I couldn't help but scan the garden entrance one more time, hoping against all reason that my parents might appear with apologies and explanations. Instead, I found Carmen watching me with knowing sadness. She approached during the song and whispered, "Rebecca, your parents don't deserve you. But mark my words, they'll come crawling back when they need something from you. And when they do, remember this day. Remember how they made you feel when you needed them most." Her warning would prove prophetic sooner than any of us could have imagined. The reception dinner at Chez Laurent was intimate and perfect. William Thompson gave a toast welcoming me into their family with words my own father had never spoken. "Rebecca, from the moment David brought you home, we knew you were special. Not because of what you accomplish or what you achieve, but because of who you are. Your kindness, your strength, your ability to love deeply despite being hurt. These are the qualities that make you extraordinary." I cried through the entire speech, mourning not just my parents' absence but the childhood I'd never had with parents who could see those qualities in me. David and I had planned a week-long honeymoon in Napa Valley, staying at a boutique vineyard resort that specialized in intimate romantic getaways. The first 3 days were blissful. We toured wineries, took couples cooking classes, and spent hours talking about our future together without the shadow of my family's dysfunction hanging over us. For the first time in years, I felt truly free from the anxiety that came with constantly wondering if I was enough, if I mattered, if I deserved love. David's presence and the beautiful California countryside created a cocoon where I could begin to imagine a life built on mutual respect and genuine affection. But on Thursday morning, our peaceful bubble burst. While David was in the shower, I decided to check social media for the first time since our wedding. What I found made my blood run cold. Harmony's Instagram account was filled with elaborate posts about her Lincoln Center performance, but it wasn't the performance content that devastated me. It was the narrative shed constructed around our parents' attendance. Post after post featured photos of Linda and Robert beaming proudly in the theater lobby, with captions that painted them as sacrificial heroes who always put their children's dreams first and understand what true family support looks like. One post in particular made me nauseous. It was a photo of Harmony in her costume, arms around both parents, with a caption that read, "Grateful beyond words for parents who understand that family means showing up for the moments that matter most." While some people create drama and demand attention, my parents have always known how to prioritize what's truly important. This performance was dedicated to their unwavering love and support. The comments section was filled with praise from family, friends, dance teachers, and extended relatives, all celebrating my parents for their wisdom in teaching their daughters about priorities and their commitment to nurturing real talent. I screenshot every post and began investigating further. What I discovered made the betrayal exponentially worse. Harmony's Lincoln Center performance hadn't been rescheduled at all. According to the theater's official social media accounts and multiple dance blogs that covered the event, the performance date had been set for months. Harmony had deliberately lied about a schedule conflict to ensure our parents would choose her event over mine. But the manipulation went deeper than a simple lie about timing. Using David's laptop and his investigative skills from his accounting background, we began uncovering a digital trail that revealed the extent of Harmony's orchestration. David helped me access phone records through our family plan, which showed that Harmony had called both of our parents multiple times in the days following my invitation. The calls were long, 30 to 45 minutes each, and occurred at strategic times when she knew I wouldn't be around. When we cross-referenced the timing of these calls with my parents' social media activity and Harmony's posts, a clear pattern emerged. Harmony hadn't just lied about her performance date. She'd spent hours on those phone calls reinforcing every negative narrative about me that my parents had ever believed. According to text message screenshots that Carmen later shared with me, Harmony had told our parents that my vague invitation was typical Rebecca attention-seeking behavior and that I was probably planning some kind of intervention or dramatic confrontation to force them to acknowledge me. Shed suggested that my insistence on formal attire was evidence of my grandiose delusions and that attending would only enable my unhealthy need to be the center of attention. The cruelest part was discovering my parents' Facebook activity during our honeymoon. Instead of private conversations, they had created public posts that served as character assassinations disguised as family wisdom. My father had shared an article about supporting the child who works hardest with a comment that read, "Some children understand that family resources should go to those who will make the most of them. Others make everything about themselves and create conflict when they don't get their way." My mother had posted a photo of herself and Harmony with a caption about recognizing real achievement versus manufactured drama. When we returned from our honeymoon early, cutting our trip short by 3 days, we discovered that the violation of our privacy and trust extended beyond social media manipulation. Our apartment had been broken into, though nothing random had been stolen. Instead, very specific items were missing. My grandmother's jewelry that David's mother had given me as a wedding gift, expensive kitchen appliances we'd received from David's family, and most heartbreakingly, several framed photos from our wedding day. The apartment management confirmed our worst fears when we reported the break-in. "Your sister stopped by on Tuesday," the building manager explained casually. "She had a key and said you were away on business. She mentioned she was picking up some items you'd asked her to store while you were traveling." Harmony had used the spare key I'd given her years ago for emergencies to systematically steal our wedding gifts. But she'd been strategic about it, taking only items given by David's family, while leaving anything contributed by our friends or purchased by us. The message was clear. She was targeting the symbols of the love and acceptance I'd found with David's family, the tangible representations of the belonging I'd never felt with my own relatives. The realization that Harmony had not only manipulated our parents into missing our wedding, but had also violated our home and stolen our possessions, felt like a complete violation of any remaining sisterly bond. This wasn't simple sibling rivalry or competition for parental attention anymore. This was calculated destruction, a deliberate campaign to sabotage my happiness and punish me for finding love and family outside of our toxic dynamic. David's fury was protective and validating, but it also opened my eyes to how deeply abnormal my family's behavior had become. Normal families don't lie about schedule conflicts to manipulate parents. Normal sisters don't steal wedding gifts. Normal parents don't publicly humiliate one child to praise another. I wasn't dealing with family dysfunction anymore. I was dealing with emotional abuse that had escalated to criminal behavior. Confronting my family required more courage than I'd ever had to muster. David offered to come with me, but I knew this was something I needed to do alone. I needed to look my parents in the eyes and tell them exactly what I thought of their choice to prioritize Harmony's performance over their daughter's wedding. I needed to hear them try to justify stealing from me, lying to me, and publicly humiliating me. Most importantly, I needed to stop hoping for an apology or acknowledgement of their wrongdoing and start accepting the reality of who they truly were. I arrived at my childhood home on a Sunday afternoon, knowing the family would be gathered for their traditional post-church dinner. Through the dining room windows, I could see them all seated around the table that had witnessed thousands of conversations where Harmony was praised and I was ignored. My parents were beaming as they listened to Harmony describe some new opportunity, their faces animated with the kind of enthusiasm they'd never shown for any of my achievements. The scene was so familiar, so typical of my entire childhood, that for a moment I almost turned around and left. But then I remembered David's words from our honeymoon. "Becca, you deserve to be heard. You deserve to speak your truth, regardless of how they respond." When I walked through the front door using my old key, the family's reaction told me everything I needed to know about their guilt and awareness of what they'd done. My mother's face immediately shifted from joy to irritation, the same expression Shed worn throughout my childhood whenever I'd interrupted something Harmony-related. My father didn't even look up from his plate, as if my presence was an inconvenience he could ignore into non-existence. Harmony's reaction was the most telling, a flash of something that looked almost like fear before she rearranged her features into feigned innocence. "Rebecca," my mother said with forced casualness, "we weren't expecting you. We're in the middle of family dinner. Harmony was just telling us about her callback for the American Ballet Theater." The casual dismissal, the implication that I wasn't part of the family that was eating dinner, the immediate redirection to Harmony's achievements, It was like experiencing my entire childhood in a single sentence. But this time, I didn't retreat to my room or apologize for existing. This time, I had something to say. "I came to talk about the wedding you missed," I said, my voice steadier than I'd expected. The silence that followed was deafening. My father finally looked up from his plate, his face cycling through surprise, recognition, and then something that looked like anger. My mother's face went pale, and Harmony suddenly became very interested in her water glass. The silence stretched until my mother broke it with the worst possible response. "You manipulated us," Linda said, her voice rising with indignation. "If you wanted us at your wedding, you should have told us it was your wedding. Instead, you played games and tried to trick us into choosing you over your sister. This is exactly the kind of manipulative behavior that makes it impossible to trust you." The accusation was so backwards, so completely divorced from reality, that I actually laughed. Here was my mother, calling me manipulative for testing whether they would prioritize their daughter without knowing what was at stake, while completely ignoring the fact that they had chosen to miss their child's wedding. My father's contribution was even worse. "This is exactly why we don't trust your judgment, Rebecca," Robert said, his tone condescending and cold. "You're always scheming for attention, always trying to compete with your sister instead of being happy for her success. If you had approached this like an adult instead of playing victim, we might have been able to work something out." The gaslighting was breathtaking. Somehow, my parents missing my wedding had become my fault for not begging hard enough for their attention. But it was Harmony's performance that truly showed me how deep the manipulation went. As soon as our parents finished their victim blaming, Harmony burst into tears that looked completely genuine. "I can't believe you would try to compete with my biggest moment," she sobbed, looking directly at me with wounded eyes. "I've worked my entire life for opportunities like Lincoln Center, and you deliberately scheduled your wedding to conflict with it. How could you be so selfish?" The audacity was stunning. Harmony, who had lied about schedule conflicts and manipulated our parents into missing my wedding, was now portraying herself as the victim of my supposed scheming. When I tried to explain that I had the date first, that her performance had been scheduled for months, and Shed lied about a conflict, my parents immediately rose to her defense. "Harmony would never lie about something that important," my mother said firmly. "You're obviously confused about the timeline, Rebecca. This is exactly what we mean about your tendency to create drama and blame others for the consequences of your poor planning." The unified front they presented, the immediate dismissal of any evidence that contradicted their narrative, the automatic assumption that Harmony was truthful and I was lying, it was like watching a choreographed performance. The conversation about my stolen belongings went even worse. When I mentioned that Harmony had used her key to take items from my apartment, including my wedding gifts and photos, the response was immediate and defensive. "Those weren't gifts for you specifically," my mother said dismissively. "They were household items, and Harmony needed them more than you do. Besides, after everything she sacrificed for her career, she deserves nice things. You have David's family now. You don't need us to buy you appliances." The casual admission that they had discussed and approved of the theft was almost more shocking than the theft itself. My father's justification was even more cruel. "Harmony has given up everything for her art," he said, as if explaining something obvious to a slow child. "She doesn't have time for a normal job or a normal life. The least we can do is make sure she has what she needs to succeed. You have a husband and a stable income. You can replace those items. Harmony's window of opportunity won't last forever." The message was clear. My possessions, my feelings, and my marriage were all expendable in service of Harmony's career. The confrontation reached its climax when I demanded a simple apology for missing my wedding and stealing from me. Instead of remorse or acknowledgement, I received an ultimatum that perfectly encapsulated everything wrong with my family. "You need to apologize to your sister for trying to sabotage her performance," my mother said firmly. "And you need to apologize to us for manipulating us and creating unnecessary family drama. Until you can take responsibility for your behavior and show some maturity, I think you should leave this house and think about what kind of daughter you want to be." As I left my childhood home for what I knew would be the last time, I could hear them through the windows already resuming their celebration of Harmony's achievements. The transition was seamless, as if my presence and our conversation had been nothing more than a minor interruption in their real family life. That night, David held me as I grieved not just for the parents I'd lost, but for the parents I'd never actually had. The confrontation had given me clarity, but it had also confirmed that there was no relationship to salvage, no love to redeem, no family dynamic that could be healed through communication or honesty. My parents' response to our confrontation was swift, calculated, and more vicious than I could have imagined. Instead of self-reflection or attempts at reconciliation, they launched a systematic campaign to destroy my credibility and punish me for challenging their narrative. Within 48 hours of my visit to their house, my boss, Jennifer Williams, received the first in what would become a series of concerned phone calls from my parents. "Miss Williams," my mother had said, according to Jennifer's later account, "I'm calling because I'm genuinely worried about my daughter Rebecca's mental state. She's been exhibiting increasingly erratic behavior, making accusations against family members, and I'm concerned that her instability might be affecting her work performance. Has she seemed unusual to you lately?" The call was perfectly crafted to plant seeds of doubt without making specific accusations, leaving Jennifer confused but concerned about an employee she'd always considered stable and reliable. Jennifer initially dismissed the call as family drama, but when my father called 2 days later with a similar message, she began to take notice. Robert's approach was more sophisticated, leveraging his business background to sound credible and concerned rather than vindictive. "I'm reaching out as a fellow business owner," he told Jennifer. "Rebecca has been struggling with some psychological issues that we're trying to help her address. We're worried that the stress of her condition might impact her professional responsibilities. I wanted to give you a heads up in case you notice any changes in her behavior or performance." The genius of their approach was its subtlety. Neither parent made specific claims about mental illness or demanded any particular action. They simply planted suggestions and waited for those suggestions to take root. When I had a normal disagreement with a colleague about marketing strategy later that week, Jennifer found herself wondering if my defensive attitude was evidence of the instability my parents had mentioned. When I requested a few days off to recover from the emotional exhaustion of the family confrontation, she interpreted it as confirmation that I was indeed struggling with psychological problems. Harmony's contribution to the campaign was more modern and potentially more damaging. She created multiple fake social media accounts and began posting concerned messages about me on platforms where mutual friends and colleagues might see them. One post, written from an account claiming to be a worried family friend, read, "Has anyone else noticed that Becca Martinez seems to be having some kind of breakdown? I heard she's been making wild accusations about family members and might be having some kind of delusional episode. I hope she gets the help she needs." Another fake account posted similar concerns on LinkedIn, targeting my professional network. The fake accounts were sophisticated enough to fool casual observers. Harmony had created detailed backstories, used stock photos of real people, and even established posting histories that went back months. When colleagues searched for these concerned friends, they found accounts that looked legitimate and established. The posts were crafted to sound worried rather than malicious, making anyone who questioned them seem callous for not caring about my well-being. But the most devastating attack came through financial channels. My parents contacted David's accounting firm, Morrison Financial, claiming that I was financially irresponsible and might be coercing their son-in-law into risky financial decisions due to mental instability. They provided specific examples of my supposed fiscal irresponsibility, citing my student loans, which had been paying responsibly for years, my credit card usage, which was actually quite conservative, and purchases like our wedding expenses, which they characterized as grandiose spending beyond her means. The call to David's firm was particularly insidious because it targeted the foundation of our new marriage. We're concerned that Rebecca might be using David's affection to manipulate him into financial situations that could harm his career, my mother told David's supervisor. She's always been prone to living beyond her means and expecting others to bail her out. We just want to make sure David understands what he's gotten himself into before she damages his professional reputation. The call was designed to make David's employer question his judgment and potentially strain our marriage by suggesting I was a financial liability. The false accusations escalated when my parents filed identity theft reports claiming I had been using their credit cards and financial information without permission. This was completely false. but the reports triggered automatic freezes on my bank accounts while the claims were investigated. Suddenly, I couldn't access my own money, couldn't pay bills, and had to explain to creditors why my accounts were frozen due to fraud investigations. The bureaucratic nightmare took weeks to resolve, during which time my credit score was damaged and my financial stability was undermined. Legal intimidation became their next weapon. My parents hired a lawyer to send a cease and desist letter demanding that I stop harassing the family with false accusations and manipulative behavior. The letter threatened legal action if I continued to defame their characters or interfere with their relationship with their other daughter. The language was carefully crafted to make me sound like a stalker or abuser rather than a daughter seeking accountability for their behavior. The isolation tactics were perhaps the most psychologically damaging part of their campaign. My parents systematically contacted extended family members, family friends, and longtime acquaintances, spinning elaborate stories about my supposed mental breakdown and dangerous behavior. They portrayed themselves as loving, concerned parents who were worried sick about their daughter's psychological state and desperate to get her help, despite my refusal to acknowledge my problems. Grandmother Rosa, my father's mother who had always been a source of unconditional love in my life, received multiple calls from my parents describing my delusional accusations and increasingly unstable behavior. They told her that I had been making wild claims about missing my wedding, stealing from my apartment, and other paranoid fantasies that proved I was having a psychological breakdown. Rosa, who was 83 and trusted her son completely, believed their story and sent me a heartbreaking letter explaining that she couldn't continue our relationship until I got professional help for my mental health issues. The campaign reached its peak when my parents appeared at David's workplace, Morrison Financial, demanding to speak with his supervisor about their concerns regarding my dangerous influence on their son-in-law. They claimed that I had been manipulating David into enabling my delusions and that his career could be at risk if he continued to support my inappropriate behavior. The scene they created was humiliating for David and professionally damaging in a conservative industry where stability and respectability were highly valued. David's supervisor, Harold Morrison, was initially sympathetic to what appeared to be concerned in-laws, but their presentation was so over-the-top and vindictive that it backfired. They spent 45 minutes in my office. Harold later told David, describing their daughter like she was some kind of dangerous criminal. But the specific examples they gave didn't match up with the woman I've met at company events. Either you've married a master manipulator who's fooled everyone she works with, or your in-laws have some serious issues with honesty. Their obvious malice and the inconsistency between their claims and my reputation with people who actually knew me began to expose their campaign for what it was. The turning point came when Aunt Carmen decided Shed had enough of watching my parents destroy me with lies and manipulation. Carmen had maintained her silence during the initial conflict, hoping that family loyalty would eventually lead to reconciliation. But when she learned about the workplace harassment, the financial sabotage, and the systematic campaign to isolate me from extended family, her protective instincts overrode her desire to keep peace. Carmen became my first and most valuable ally in what would become a methodical counteroffensive against my parents' lies. Carmen's decision to help wasn't just emotional, it was strategic. As my mother's sister, she had insider knowledge of the family dynamics and access to information that others couldn't obtain. She began documenting every conversation she had with Linda, keeping detailed notes about the stories my parents were telling and the inconsistencies in their various narratives. Carmen discovered that my parents had been telling different versions of events to different family members, adjusting their story based on their audience and what they thought each person would believe. The documentation process revealed the scope of their deception. To religious relatives, my parents emphasized concerns about my moral character and suggested that David was a bad influence, leading me away from family values. To business associates, they focused on my alleged financial irresponsibility and professional instability. To family friends, they played up the mental health angle, positioning themselves as suffering parents, dealing with a daughter who had never been quite right. Carmen's careful record-keeping created a paper trail that would prove invaluable in exposing their lies. David's family emerged as my second pillar of support, and their response to my parents' workplace harassment demonstrated the difference between healthy and toxic family dynamics. Instead of believing accusations from people they barely knew, William and Patricia Thompson immediately rallied around us. David's brother Marcus, who worked as a corporate attorney, offered his legal expertise pro bono. "What your parents are doing isn't just cruel," Marcus explained during a family meeting at their house. "It's potentially criminal. Workplace harassment, filing false reports, identity theft allegations, RDS, these actions have legal consequences." Marcus began building a case by collecting evidence of my parents' systematic harassment campaign. He subpoenaed phone records showing the frequency and timing of their calls to my employer and David's firm. He gathered documentation of the false identity theft claims and the resulting damage to my credit score. Most importantly, he helped us understand that we weren't just dealing with family drama anymore. We were dealing with targeted harassment that constituted legal stalking and defamation. My childhood friend, Sophia Martinez, no relation despite sharing my surname, provided another crucial perspective when she returned from her overseas consulting assignment in London. Sophia had been my closest friend through high school and college, and she'd witnessed my family's dysfunction firsthand during countless sleepovers and family events. Her return to San Francisco couldn't have been better timed, and her outsider's perspective on my family's behavior was both validating and strategically valuable. "Becca," Sophia said when I filled her in on everything that had happened, "what you're describing isn't normal family conflict. I watched your parents ignore you for years, but this is active persecution. They're not just playing favorites anymore, they're trying to destroy your life because you dared to call them out." Sophia's husband James worked in cybersecurity, and he volunteered to help us investigate the fake social media accounts that had been targeting my reputation. His technical expertise would prove crucial in documenting Harmony's online manipulation. The breakthrough in our counter-investigation came from an unexpected source, my 83-year-old grandmother Rosa. After receiving my parents' calls about my supposed mental breakdown, Rosa had been heartbroken about cutting contact with me. But her neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, had attended our wedding reception as a +1 with David's great-aunt. When Mrs. Peterson mentioned seeing Rosa's granddaughter's beautiful wedding ceremony, Rosa was confused and asked for details. Mrs. Peterson's description of our elegant garden ceremony, the loving family atmosphere, and my obvious happiness didn't match the story of mental instability and delusion that my parents had told Rosa. "Your granddaughter was radiant," Mrs. Peterson explained. "The groom's family was so welcoming, and everyone was talking about what a lovely couple they made. She certainly didn't seem unstable or troubled. In fact, she seemed happier than I've ever seen her." The disconnect between Mrs. Peterson's first-hand account and my parents' narrative made Rosa question everything she'd been told. Rosa called Carmen to discuss her confusion, and Carmen seized the opportunity to tell her mother the truth about what had really happened. Rosa's reaction was immediate and fierce. "Those idiots missed their own daughter's wedding," Rosa said, according to Carmen's later account. "And then they had the audacity to lie to me about it? I raised my son better than that. Or at least I thought I did." Rosa's guilt at being manipulated by her own son was quickly replaced by rage at being used as a weapon against her granddaughter. With Rosa's support secured, we gained access to extended family members who had been turned against me based on my parents' lies. Rosa began making her own phone calls, telling relatives the truth about what had happened and expressing her disappointment in Robert and Linda's behavior. Her credibility as the family matriarch and her obvious distress at being deceived gave weight to our side of the story in a way that my own explanations never could have achieved. Dr. Sarah Chen, the therapist David had encouraged me to see for dealing with family trauma, provided professional validation that proved crucial for my mental health and our legal strategy. Dr. Chen's assessment confirmed that I showed no signs of the mental instability my parents claimed, but rather classic symptoms of someone recovering from long-term emotional abuse. Her professional opinion and detailed session notes created an official record that contradicted my parents' narrative about my psychological state. The private investigator that Marcus recommended uncovered the extent of Harmony's social media manipulation and my parents' financial schemes. The investigation revealed that my parents had indeed been using my social security number and personal information for various financial purposes over the years, from opening store credit cards to claiming me as a dependent on insurance policies long after ED moved out. This wasn't just recent retaliation, it was a pattern of financial exploitation that had been ongoing for years. Most shocking was the discovery that my parents had been claiming educational tax credits for Harmony using my social security number, essentially stealing tax benefits that should have been mine and using them to fund Harmony's dance training. The financial investigation revealed thousands of dollars in fraudulent claims and explained why my credit report had shown inconsistencies I'd never understood. My parents hadn't just stolen my possessions, they'd been stealing my identity for financial gain for years. With evidence mounting and allies secured, we began planning a comprehensive response to my parents' campaign of harassment and defamation. The goal wasn't revenge, it was protection and accountability. We needed to stop their ongoing attacks on my reputation and livelihood, recover the stolen items and fraudulent financial gains, and establish legal barriers to prevent future harassment. Most importantly, we needed to create consequences for their behavior that would demonstrate to them and to our extended family that their actions were unacceptable and would not be tolerated. The unraveling of my parents' carefully constructed narrative began with grandmother Rosa's withdrawal of financial support for Harmony's career. Rosa had been contributing $1,500 monthly to cover Harmony's training, costumes, and performance expenses, believing that her investment was helping a dedicated granddaughter pursue her dreams. When Rosa learned that this same granddaughter had manipulated the family into missing her sister's wedding and then orchestrated a campaign of lies and harassment, her support ended immediately. "I didn't raise my family to treat each other like this," Rosa told Harmony during what Carmen later described as a legendary phone call. Rosa's cancellation of financial support wasn't just about the money, it was about the principle. You lied to your grandparents, you stole from your sister, and you helped your parents destroy her reputation. This is not how we treat family, no matter how talented you think you are. Harmony's breakdown during that call, according to Rosa, was the first genuine emotion she'd shown throughout the entire crisis. The financial impact on Harmony was immediate and severe. Without Rosa's monthly contribution, my parents couldn't afford to maintain Harmony's expensive training schedule at the elite Manhattan studio where she'd been studying. The loss of financial support forced them to make difficult choices about which classes and private lessons they could continue to fund. For a family that had structured their entire life around Harmony's career advancement, the financial pressure created stress and conflict that began to crack their united front. David's brother Marcus had strategically chosen our cousin Mariah's wedding as the venue for publicly revealing the truth about our marriage and my parents' behavior. Mariah's wedding would bring together extended family members who had been influenced by my parents' lies, along with family, friends, and community members who had seen their social media posts celebrating their wise parenting decisions. The setting would allow us to control the narrative while reaching the maximum number of people who needed to hear the truth. At Mariah's reception, Carmen arranged for me to give a toast that would officially announce our marriage to the extended family. Standing at the microphone with David beside me, I looked out at cousins, aunts, uncles, and family friends who had known me since childhood but had been told I was having a mental breakdown. "I want to share some wonderful news with you all," I began, my voice steady despite my racing heart. 3 months ago, David and I were married in a beautiful ceremony that brought together everyone who truly loves and supports us. The reaction in the room was immediate and telling. Extended family members who had been told I was delusional looked shocked to see me calm, happy, and obviously stable. Relatives who had been fed stories about my inappropriate behavior saw David's family embracing me warmly and treating me with obvious affection and respect. Most importantly, people began asking questions about why they hadn't been invited to or informed about our wedding, questions that led naturally to explanations about my parents' choice to attend Harmony's performance instead. The revelation about my parents missing their daughter's wedding sent ripples of shock and disapproval through our extended family. Hispanic culture places enormous emphasis on family celebrations, particularly weddings, and the idea that parents would voluntarily miss their child's wedding was almost incomprehensible to our relatives. When the additional details emerged about the stolen items, the workplace harassment, and the false accusations, the family's reaction shifted from shock to outrage. My parents' attempt at damage control during Mariah's reception backfired spectacularly. Instead of acknowledging their mistakes or offering explanations, Linda and Robert doubled down on their victim narrative, claiming they had been deceived and manipulated into missing my wedding. Their defensive responses and obvious anger at being exposed publicly contradicted the concerned, loving parent image they had been trying to maintain. Extended family members who had been sympathetic to their worried parent story began to see through their manipulation. The community theater where Harmony performed, which had been one of her most prestigious venues, learned about the stolen wedding items through Sophia's lawyer husband James. The theater's board took the theft allegations seriously, particularly when they realized that some of the stolen items had been displayed in Harmony's dressing room during recent performances. The theater suspended Harmony's performance privileges pending their internal investigation, effectively banning our entire family from their programs. But the most devastating blow came when Harmony, under pressure from multiple directions and facing the collapse of her carefully maintained image, finally broke down and admitted to her role in orchestrating the entire conflict. During a confrontation with Rosa, Harmony tearfully confessed that she had lied about the performance schedule conflict because she couldn't stand the thought of Rebecca getting attention on the same day as my important show. Her admission revealed not just the extent of her manipulation, but the depth of her jealousy and resentment. Harmony's confession opened the floodgates for additional revelations. She admitted to creating the fake social media accounts, to calling my workplace with false information, and to encouraging our parents' harassment campaign. Most shocking was her admission that she had been lying to and manipulating our parents for years, feeding them stories about my supposed resentment and jealousy while positioning herself as the innocent victim of my competition. The golden child our parents had sacrificed everything to support had been manipulating them as much as she had manipulated everyone else. The legal consequences of my parents' harassment campaign became real when Marcus successfully obtained a restraining order requiring them to cease all contact with David's workplace, my employer, and any of our mutual friends or family members. The order also required them to stop posting about us on social media and to remove any existing defamatory content. The legal documentation of their harassment created a public record of their behavior that contradicted their claims of being loving, concerned parents. Financial restitution became the next battleground. The private investigators' evidence of identity theft and fraudulent use of my personal information provided grounds for both civil and criminal complaints. My parents were forced to pay restitution for the educational tax credits they had fraudulently claimed, the damaged credit score they had caused through false reports, and the stolen items they had given to Harmony. The financial penalties were substantial enough to impact their comfortable lifestyle and business operations. The social consequences proved equally devastating. My parents' real estate business suffered as clients learned about the family scandal through mutual connections and community networks. Several business relationships were severed when partners decided they couldn't trust people who would systematically lie about and harass their own daughter. The professional reputation Robert and Linda had spent decades building was damaged by their personal behavior becoming public knowledge. The community ostracism was perhaps the most immediate consequence. Family friends who had celebrated my parents' wise parenting on social media felt embarrassed and manipulated when they learned the truth. Invitations to social events dried up as hosts decided they didn't want the drama and negative energy my parents brought with them. The social status they had enjoyed as successful business owners and parents of a talented dancer crumbled as their behavior became widely known and discussed. The path to healing began in Dr. Sarah Chen's office, where I finally had to confront the reality that I couldn't change my parents, couldn't make them love me the way I deserved to be loved, and couldn't fix a family dynamic that had been broken since childhood. The hardest lesson wasn't accepting that my parents were flawed. It was accepting that they were actively harmful, and that protecting myself required maintaining distance from them, regardless of societal expectations about family loyalty. Dr. Chen helped me understand that hoping for their transformation was keeping me trapped in a cycle of disappointment and self-doubt. The breakthrough moment came when Dr. Chen asked me a simple question that changed my entire perspective. Rebecca, if David treated you the way your parents treat you, how long would you stay in that relationship? The answer was immediate and obvious. I wouldn't tolerate from a romantic partner the dismissal, manipulation, gaslighting, and abuse that had been accepting from my parents my entire life. That realization helped me understand that biology doesn't create an obligation to accept mistreatment, and that choosing to protect my mental health wasn't selfish or ungrateful. David and I decided to have a second wedding celebration, this time for ourselves and the people who had supported us through the crisis. The renewal of vows ceremony took place exactly 1 year after our original wedding, in the same garden where wed first married. But this time, we were surrounded by chosen family who had proven their love through actions rather than words. Rosa was there, beaming with pride and wearing the corsage that should have adorned my mother's wrist the year before. Carmen served as my matron of honor, representing the family connection I'd always craved but had to find outside my immediate family. The celebration was everything our original wedding had been, but without the shadow of absence and disappointment. David's family welcomed our extended chosen family with the same warmth they'd shown me from the beginning. Sophia and her husband James, who had become close friends through our shared crisis, renewed their own marriage vows alongside us. Mrs. Peterson, Rosa's neighbor who had inadvertently exposed my parents' lies, was honored as a special guest for her role in bringing truth to light. Rosa's presence at our renewal ceremony was particularly meaningful because it represented the healing that was possible when family members chose accountability over enabling. Rosa had not only acknowledged her mistake in believing my parents' lies, but she had actively worked to repair the damage by reaching out to other family members and setting the record straight. Her courage in confronting her own son and holding him accountable gave me hope that some family relationships could be salvaged and strengthened through honesty. Carmen's role as my matron of honor symbolized the family relationship I'd always deserved. Carmen had consistently chosen to see me as I truly was rather than through the distorted lens my parents had created. She had risked her relationship with her sister to support me, demonstrating the kind of fierce family loyalty I'd never experienced before. Having Carmen beside me as I renewed my vows felt like finally having the maternal support I'd craved my entire life. My career flourished once the cloud of my parents' harassment campaign had lifted. Jennifer Williams, my boss at Fletcher Marketing Group, not only apologized for doubting me but promoted me to marketing director with a significant salary increase. The promotion was both recognition of my professional abilities and acknowledgement of the way I'd handled an extremely difficult personal situation with grace and professionalism. Jennifer later admitted that watching me maintain my work quality despite personal attacks had impressed her and convinced her that I had the resilience needed for leadership. The new position came with opportunities to mentor other young professionals, and I found particular satisfaction in supporting colleagues who were dealing with difficult family situations. My experience with manipulation and gaslighting had given me skills in recognizing toxic patterns and helping others develop healthy boundaries. The mentoring relationships became a way to transform my painful experiences into something beneficial for others facing similar challenges. Volunteer work with support groups for family scapegoats became an important part of my healing journey. Meeting other adults who had been systematically undermined, ignored, or abused by their families helped me understand that my experience wasn't unique or personal. The support groups validated feelings I'd been taught to suppress and provided strategies for maintaining relationships with extended family members while protecting myself from toxic immediate family dynamics. Through the support groups, I learned about the concept of chosen family and began to understand that the people who show up for you consistently, who celebrate your successes and support you through challenges, are your real family regardless of biological connection. David's family had chosen me from the moment I entered their lives. Carmen and Rosa had chosen to see past my parents' lies and maintain their relationships with me. Sophia and James had chosen to stand by me despite the potential for family conflict. These relationships, built on mutual respect and genuine affection, provided the family experience I'd always craved. The most surprising development was receiving a letter from my parents, approximately 18 months after our confrontation. The letter was brief and awkward, acknowledging that they had made mistakes in how they handled my wedding and the aftermath. They stopped short of a full apology or admission of wrongdoing, but they expressed regret for the misunderstanding and hoped we could move forward as a family. The letter felt like too little, too late, particularly given that they were facing social and financial consequences for their behavior and might have been motivated by those pressures rather than genuine remorse. After discussing the letter with David and Dr. Chen, I made the difficult decision not to respond. The letter didn't acknowledge the full extent of their harmful behavior, didn't take responsibility for the systematic harassment campaign, and didn't indicate any understanding of why their actions had been wrong. Most importantly, it didn't include any commitment to changed behavior or respect for the boundaries I had established. Responding would have opened the door to further manipulation and given them hope that they could eventually return to the old family dynamics. Harmony's journey toward accountability took much longer and was far more complicated. 2 years after the wedding crisis, she reached out through Carmen to request a conversation. Harmony had spent those 2 years in therapy, working to understand her role in the family dysfunction and her own manipulative behaviors. Her therapist had helped her recognize that her parents' favoritism had been as harmful to her as their neglect had been to me, trapping her in a role where she felt pressured to be perfect and resented me for representing an alternative way of living. Our first conversation in 3 years was tentative and carefully structured. Harmony acknowledged the specific ways she had harmed me, including the lies about schedule conflicts, the theft of wedding items, the fake social media accounts, and her role in encouraging our parents' harassment campaign. She didn't make excuses or try to justify her behavior based on family dynamics or pressure. Most importantly, she expressed understanding that her apology didn't create an obligation for me to forgive her or resume our relationship. The slow process of rebuilding a relationship with Harmony taught me about the difference between forgiveness and reconciliation. I was able to forgive her for her past behavior as part of my own healing process, but reconciliation required ongoing evidence of changed behavior and respect for my boundaries. Harmony demonstrated her commitment to change by maintaining the therapy that helped her develop healthier relationship patterns and by never pressuring me for more contact than I was comfortable with. The most joyful development in our new life was discovering that David and I were expecting our first child. The pregnancy announcement brought tremendous excitement from our chosen family, with Rosa immediately beginning to knit blankets and David's parents talking about converting their guest room into a nursery for visits. The contrast with my parents' likely reaction was stark but no longer painful. I was creating a family where children would be valued for who they are, not for what they achieve or how they reflect on their parents. Preparing for parenthood made me more determined than ever to break the generational patterns of favoritism, conditional love, and emotional manipulation that had characterized my childhood. David and I took parenting classes that emphasized healthy communication, emotional validation, and unconditional love. We committed to creating a home where our children would never have to compete for affection or prove their worth through achievements. The final lesson of this journey was understanding that true family chooses you every day through their actions, not just through their words or biological connection. David chooses me every morning when he asks about my plans and genuinely listens to my answers. Rosa chooses me when she calls to share family news and includes me in important decisions. Carmen chooses me when she stands up to family members who criticize my boundaries. Sophia chooses me when she travels across the country to celebrate important milestones. These daily choices, these consistent demonstrations of love and respect, create family bonds that are stronger than any biological connection. Looking back on the pain of my parents missing my wedding, I can now see that their absence was actually a gift. Their choice revealed the truth about our relationship and freed me from the exhausting cycle of hoping for love that was never going to be freely given. Their absence made space for the people who truly belonged in my life to step forward and claim their rightful place. Most importantly, their absence taught me to recognize and value the love that was actually available to me, instead of chasing the love that was always going to be conditional. The wedding they missed was just one day, but the family I built in the aftermath is lasting. Every holiday celebration with chosen family, every milestone celebrated by people who genuinely care about my happiness, every moment of unconditional support during difficult times, these experiences have created a life richer and more loving than anything I could have had if my parents had simply shown up to my wedding and continued their pattern of emotional neglect. Sometimes, the greatest gift toxic people can give you is their absence, because it creates space for healthy love to flourish. So here's my question for you. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and protecting your own well-being? How did you handle family members who couldn't celebrate your happiness because it didn't center around them? Share your stories in the comments below. Your experiences might help someone else who's struggling with similar family dynamics. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button to help it reach others who might need to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about choosing yourself when family won't choose you, and share this video with anyone who needs a reminder that they deserve unconditional love. Thank you for listening to my story and for supporting each other in the comments. Remember, you deserve family members who show up for you consistently, and if you don't have those people yet, keep your heart open, because chosen family has a way of finding you when you need them most. Wishing you all the courage to set boundaries and the wisdom to recognize real love when it appears in your life.